I, Connor Dixon, was planning to move to a new city, the city where my dear cousin Jeremy lived, and took a long weekend there to figure it all out. The original plan was to stay with Jeremy, but his wife's whole family decided to leave at the same time, so I was put up at the Hilton. No matter, one of the few problems I don't have in life is money. My biggest problem is the lack of valuable female interaction. I seem to be attracted to the wrong women, which usually leaves me feeling angry, frustrated, confused, or heartbroken. Since Jeremy didn't like to spend much time with his wife's family, he took care of me while I looked for housing and started my law firm. In my practice, I rarely have to meet my clients in person, which allows me to live and work as a prosecutor anywhere. On Saturday night, Jeremy and I went to a party thrown by one of his business partners, Tom Baring. The party was a typical 20-something party, except that the finished basement had a large ballroom that was in active use. There were single women there. I was a good dancer and loved to dance, so I was busy. Finally, while taking a break from dancing around the menu, I noticed Susan had come into the kitchen to make more cold drinks. When we arrived, I was introduced to her, and she said the only thing I heard from her all evening. "Hello." I followed her into the kitchen, and as expected, she said, "Sue Sean, she looks like you." Too much work and no fun. I can help you? If you don't remember our brief relationship, my name is Connor. She looked not only into my eyes, but also, it seemed, into my soul, eyes so dark that they were almost black, and answered, "Thank you." Then he began to wash the glasses in the sink and asked, "Can you dry them?" I took a rag and started drying it. I tried to talk to her, and although she answered questions, her responses were short, not angry, just short, and her response to statements was usually just a nod or a smile with very few words. After washing all the cups, I helped her replenish the snacks and then took half the plates and cups to the ballroom and bar. After a while, I asked her to dance. She hesitated. "Tom doesn't like it when I dance," was probably the longest thing he said that evening. "What a shame," I laughed and led her to the dance floor. She was an athletic dancer and seemed to be having fun. But as we started our second dance, Tom walked up to her and more or less ordered her to give him something. She shrugged and left. He was furious, and if he hadn't been the host and one of Jeremy's colleagues, he would have intervened. Sometime later, I found Susan alone in the kitchen. I turned her towards me and asked, "Why did you let Tom treat you like that? You seemed like a wonderful woman who loved to talk to you. You shouldn't let him walk over you." She smiled and simply replied, "It's complicated. Can you help me a little more?" I willingly completed one more task for her, and then she came to me. "Where do you live?" he asked, for the first time starting a conversation not only with me, but with everyone he looked at. "At the Grand Hilton Hotel. How did you know that I would come to you?" "Jeremy introduced you," he said with a smile. Then he asked another question that surprised me. "Does your room have a view of the lake?" "Yes, the view is magnificent." "So this is an even-numbered room. What floor is it on?" 810, you must know Hilton, I replied with a smile. She smiled back and started doing something else. When Jeremy and I left, I wanted to say goodbye to Susan. Tom was too drunk at the time to remember what I said to him, so instead of thanking him, I just muttered, "You're an idiot." I think Susan heard me. At least I think that's what made him smile. Jeremy and I went to a local hangout, played pool, and then went to my hotel. I took a shower, was in my underwear and getting ready for bed when there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole, but all I saw was a strand of a woman's hair. I opened the door and was surprised to see Susan. He is wearing a cloak. When I said, "Hey, Susan, why are you here?" Susan didn't say anything. Instead, she unbuttoned her robe and revealed her beautiful naked body, much more beautiful than in clothes. There are many of them, including quite huge breasts. Then the desired shock effect was achieved, and he took the opportunity to get around me. When I closed the door and opened my mouth, although my eyes were still wide open, she was only wearing high heels. He grabbed me by the neck and kissed me so hard that the smoke detector went off, although luckily it didn't. Then he reached into my panties and found that my dick was already hard. The result was the strangest sexual experience of my life. As far as I know, no words were spoken. There was a lot of moaning, groaning, screaming, and excited exclamation, but no real words. I think Susan had been in my room for less than 3 minutes when she impaled herself on my erect penis as I lay face up on the sheet. Sometimes she would lean forward and kiss me, moving up and down, obviously trying to get my dick out. My hands alternate between touching her breasts visually and tactily, squeezing her hips and helping her move up and down. I haven't gone to bed in 2 months, but I managed to avoid going to bed too early. The more I touched and kissed Susan, the harder my cock became, and the more aroused I became. Susan is the most relaxed and energetic sex partner I have ever had or dreamed of in my life. While we were both sweating, her pussy suddenly squeezed my dick like a vice, and I exploded like Vesuvius. She screamed, but continued to push and release my dick until she squeezed every last drop of cum out of me. We finally stop, both exhausted. We somehow separate our mated parts and fall asleep or lose consciousness, depending on the duration and intensity of the mating. I don't know how much time passed, but I felt movement in my steps. I looked down and saw Susan sucking my dick. I rubbed her head while she sucked. As I tensed up again, she pulled away and got on all fours on the bed, slapping her buttocks and pointing her pussy at my face. Even though our first fuck was intense and her pussy was very wet, it was still tight when I penetrated her doggy style. And oddly enough, she always wore high heels, which turned me on as much as her perfume and seemingly perfect pussy. When I was buried, I had more energy than I'd ever had in my life, and somehow she managed to get her PC muscles out of sync with my thrusts in and out. I quickly released the second largest load of my life as we both collapsed onto the mattress. I was shocked and didn't notice Susan apparently get up, put on her robe, and disappear. When I was lying in bed, I was very cold. I finally covered myself with the blanket and slept well. When I woke up the next morning, I was sure that it was just a dream. I was convinced it was true because his dick was red and there was a lipstick note on the dresser. The note included a smiley face and the word "thank you." I struggled to remember if Susan had spoken during our debauchery last night. I don't remember a word he said, but if his actions were words, they would fill an entire book the size of Tolstoy's War and Peace. The next day, I was practically in a trance. Jeremy and I walked around several houses and offices together, but I was not there. He probably asked me 6 times, "Connor, what's wrong with you?" I sort of apologized for the hangover, even though I had probably only drunk 2 bottles of beer the night before. However, I have a hangover, a sexual hangover. When I got home Monday morning, all I could think about was my sexual encounter with Silent Susan. Even though I've dated at least a dozen women more beautiful than Susan, sex with her was far better than any sex I've ever had. I should be ashamed and guilty for having sex with a married woman, something I had never done before and which degraded me intellectually and morally. Instead, I just felt excited. As I prepare to move next month, I'm practically mentally exhausted. Except when I'm actively working or exercising, I think about Susan. After moving, it took me a month to start looking for a partner in the new city. I made it a rule never to visit Susan or try to contact her. After about 3 months, I really liked my new city. I was making more money than before, the atmosphere was lively, and I had friends, both men and women. I went on a few dates, but nothing really excited me. It was almost the 3rd anniversary of moving into a new house, and I went to a party at Jeremy's house. I was having a great time when Tom and Susan walked through the door. When I saw Susan, I was immediately reminded of the heavenly experience I had in room 810 at the local Hilton. She looked the same as she did at the party, although the dress was a different color and her hair was more elaborate. I waited until Tom had had a few drinks and Susan was alone on Jeremy's small dance floor before approaching her. "Hi, Susan," I smile. "Hi, Connor," she replied, smiling back. "Do you want to dance?" I asked and extended my hand. She simply nodded, smiled, and took my hand. In fact, we were dancing up a storm. Susan is less shy than at parties because she doesn't have to worry about leaving snacks and drinks behind, and she is a more athletic dancer than I imagined. After about 45 minutes of intense dancing, we were both sweating, and I said, "Let's take a break. What do you want to drink?" "Soda," was his response. She stood still until I brought her something to drink, which made me smile. "Will Tom bring you something to drink?" I asked, drinking beer. "I bought Tom a drink," she replied. In another interaction, she tended to give short answers to questions, mostly using body language to respond to statements, and I laughed when I said, "You don't talk much, do you?" She smiled happily. Some men dream of not being with a talkative woman. I believe in actions, not words. We danced some more, and I followed her throughout the party, talking to different people. He seemed happy to participate in the group chat, although he still rarely spoke. After the party, he excuses himself and looks for Tom. I was about to leave when she came up to me and asked, "Can you help me take care of Tom?" He fainted. "Of course," I smile. I found Tom passed out in the glider on Jeremy's deck. I never mentioned my height because it didn't matter before, but I'm tall, fit, and can easily carry his, about 180 pounds, on my shoulders in a fireman's harness, walk up to him next to the car, and then sit down. He put him in the back seat so he could sit down. Susan asked in a more eloquent tone than I had ever heard, "Can you come home and get him?" "No problem," I said, smiling. Getting Tom's dead weight out of the back seat was harder than getting it out of Jeremy's glider, but it worked. "Where do you want to go?" I asked Susanna. "Please go to the bedroom on the second floor." He opened the door for me, approaching. After putting him to bed, she and I left the bedroom and closed the door, and then she pounced on me like a dog in heat. After about 2 minutes of passionate kissing, she said, "Take a shower." I think the word shower was the only real word she said for the next 90 minutes, although it made a lot of noise, especially when I fucked her from behind in the shower and hurt her tits. After our second sex in the so-called confrontational position, I sat on the bed in her guest room and she looked at me, almost comatose, coming hard. I don't know how she could move her pussy back and forth in that position, sometimes even making circles in that position, but it sure worked, especially when I started coming and she pressed her computer against my dick muscles and screamed in ecstasy. Finally, we let her go and lay down next to each other, wincing, kissing. Sometimes I sucked her nipples and she caressed my balls. After a pleasant period of dizziness, he said, "Sometimes Tom wakes up 2 hours after losing consciousness. Maybe it's time for you to go." That's all I've heard from her since I've known her. After I got dressed, we said goodbye, he said. "If you would like me to stay with you on Wednesday evening, please give me your address." Since the sex this time was incredibly better than the first time, I replied, 902 Chardonnay Court. After another quick kiss, I walked out the door. I wasn't sure if Susan would be at my house on Wednesday, but to make a good impression, I had it professionally cleaned and put down new sheets on Tuesday. When I got home around 5:30 a.m. On Wednesday, Susan stood on my porch with a big smile on her face. When I approached her, she kissed me briefly, but passionately. "I was thinking about ordering Chinese takeout after dessert," she said, laughing. During dessert, she rode me with the skill of an Olympic dressage champion and tried to rip my dick off again. In post-coital bliss, I sucked the deliciously hard nipples of her huge breasts while she massaged my balls and giggled every now and then. "I'm going to order Chinese food now," she squealed as I stopped sucking on her nipple and grabbed her phone, hit speed dial, and ordered what I wanted. I wondered how he knew I wanted something. "I'll eat steak later," she laughed, squeezing my dick. Susan insisted on paying the delivery guy, so I gave her the soda. She confirmed my suspicions that she had not been drinking. "I don't want to go crazy," she apologized. I laughed to myself. "If it's not wild, how about you come to my hotel room and have sex at home with your husband in the next room?" After dinner, I invited her to watch a Netflix movie so our food could digest. Although he didn't respond as usual, he was clearly happy. She was very excited when we saw the film. After the movie ended, he gave me another one of his patented, passionate kisses and then quickly took off his clothes. After a shower, more sex, better than before, and pillow talk, again she answered questions succinctly and responded to statements with body language, we fell asleep in each other's arms. This morning I woke up early. I think my alarm went off around 3:30 a.m. Then place it in the spoon position. My cock quickly became hard as I rubbed it against her ass. He woke up, put his hands on his ass and spread it. The only words he said were, "my ass." I've only been hacked once in my life. It was a good experience, but I didn't think about repeating it. However, in the moonlight streaming through the skylight, the rosebuds looked attractive. When my penis passed through her sphincter, she could move her buttocks back and forth in the same way as I moved my penis back and forth, although I was next to her. I had a really nice orgasm, and apparently she did too, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. When I woke up, Susan wasn't with me, but her clothes and small suitcase were still in my room, so I assumed she hadn't left. The smell of frying bacon turns me on too. When I entered the kitchen, bacon was on the stove. Susan looked up from the notepad she was writing in and smiled. "I can make you an omelet," he said, lifting my naked body and kissing me again. "I'll help you." I smiled and kissed him again. We took off our clothes and made cheesecakes together. I asked him innocuous questions, and his answers were mostly brief. Until I asked him, "What did you write in your notebook?" "I'm just doing some entropy calculations on the advanced BWXT nuclear reactor I'm working on," he replied, deftly turning our table with just his wrists. "What are you saying?" I laughed. After eating a few strips of bacon and half an omelet, he began to talk instead of just answering questions or statements. When we finished, I realized how good it was. Although he is only 27 years old, he has a PhD in nuclear science and engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and has been working in the field for 6 years. When he started talking about his job, I don't think he stayed 20 minutes until we had finished breakfast, washed the bacon and tortillas, and put the plates and cutlery in the dishwasher. He concluded by saying, "Well, in a nutshell, that's what I do." Of course, I understood about a tenth of what he said, but it was clear that he was a damn genius. I kissed him in the kitchen and asked, "So you're a fucking genius?" "Actually, with your help, I will become a sexual genius," he replied with a smile, and then insisted that we take one more ride in the hay before we both left for work. For the next 4 months, I slept with Susan twice a week. She was always silent unless we somehow started talking about nuclear fission or fusion, which I read so as not to be completely out of her area, in which case she becomes a charlatan. When Susan collected my ashes twice a week, I remained a sexually happy gentleman and dated few people. Then she stayed at my house while Tom was out of town, and I watched her sleep after another great fuck. I noticed bruises on parts of her body and wondered if Tom had hurt her. I was skeptical because when I asked Tom about past physical therapy sessions, he never provided an answer. I suddenly admitted to myself that I had feelings for her, and although every time I saw her husband, I hated him even more for the way he treated her and what a piece of shit he was, I still came to the conclusion that it was me. I'm angry at myself for fucking a married woman. I slept little from Monday evening until Tuesday morning. Susan and I spent most of the time looking at the ceiling and holding each other, although of course we still had to have divine morning sex. But I decided I had to do something. At breakfast, Susan surprised me by reading my mind. "Don't you think you should invite me to stay with you, Connor?" he asked in the longest sentence he had ever spoken to me, and one that had nothing to do with his job. "You are married," I replied. "You have to protect me from this," he responded quickly, then kissed me and ran out the door. All the time on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, when I wasn't really working, I thought about Susan. I tried to call her on her cell phone, but the answering machine went to voicemail and she didn't call back. On Thursday evening, 3 men in suits and a woman paid a surprise visit. A man, Arnold, introduces himself as Susan's boss. Another, Patrick, is from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Rockville, Maryland. Another, Agent Stoll, is an FBI agent, and a woman, Astrid, is a family law attorney. "We're here to talk about Susan Baring," Arnold said. "Can I come in?" "Of course," I replied, leading them into my living room and offering them a drink, which they both declined. "Let me get to the point," Arnold said. "As you know, Susan is a genius and very important to our project to create a nuclear reactor that will avoid most of the problems of modern boiling water reactors and pressurized water reactors. I'm proud to say that I learned about SWR and DWR from conversations with Susan." "I know," I said, smiling. "Well, we need you to save Susan. She is currently in Mercy Hospital where she was beaten by her husband," he continued. "What?" Did I scream? Apparently that's why I couldn't contact her. "Because she is a Tier 1 federal contractor, we have him under arrest, and he will not be released on bail," Agent Stoll added. "Susan asked me to file for divorce, which I will do tomorrow," Astrid interjected. "My documents are ready." "Where did I come from?" I asked. "Susan wants to be with you during your recovery. If you take over at night, my company will pay for assistance during the day." "She's not helpless, she's just heartbroken," Arnold continued. "But she doesn't believe in much. Other people besides you." Arnold then said, "I'm afraid my company bears a lot of responsibility for Susan's situation, and that disappoints me deeply. Susan had never had sex before she came to our house because she was very quiet and shy, the youngest in the class. For showing signs of depression, it was very valuable to us, so we agreed that Tom Baring would offer it. Apparently the people who were in charge of Tom, and either I don't know him well or I don't know him very well, otherwise I wouldn't care about Susan's interests." I admit I was surprised. Susan was so passionate and happy during sex that I thought she had experience. Now I was told that before we met she did not exist and that she had real feelings for me. While I was still trying to understand what Arnold was saying, Patrick began to tell me how valuable Susan was to the nuclear community, but I politely interrupted him. I don't need advertising, Patrick. Before you came here, I was trying to make a decision about Susan. Break up with her because she's married, or convince her to get rid of that bastard Tom. Under the circumstances, was going to come to me to her. The compromise was accepted. I'm telling you. I'm going to visit him now in the hospital, and after talking with him, I'll call Arnold and tell him my decision. There were smiles everywhere. Do you mind if we come to your house and see where we can prepare a hospital bed for Susan and what arrangements need to be made for medical care? Asked Astrid. No, okay, I smiled, grabbing the car keys from the kitchen shelf. When you leave, make sure the front door is locked. I shook hands with all four of them and drove to Mercy Hospital. Susan's private room was guarded by a policeman, but he quickly decided that I had a right to see her, so I walked past him without any problem. I was surprised by his condition. He had 2 black eyes, bruises on his face and neck, a sprained leg, and an arm in a cast. His eyes were closed, but when I gently touched his cheek, they immediately opened. Although she looked hurt, she smiled when she saw me. You only like me for sex, Connor? He asked with a smile that turned into concern. No, even though sleeping with you is the best thing that ever happened to me. I love being with you, Susan. I like to be with you. Maybe I even love you. I love you, Connor. You have been kinder to me than any man, including my male relatives. And before I met you, I was never an emotional person. At least now I want to be with you all the time. Times of day. This time, you are going to have sex. Can you let me stay with you for a while? If you don't need me in a few months, I won't leave you with any problems. That would be good, I laughed and kissed him tenderly on the lips. His smile lights up the room. We then had an hour-long discussion about our life goals, our vision for children, our backgrounds, and much more. Susan, who had been almost silent before, was no longer silent. Finally, the nurse kicked me out and told me Susan needed to sleep. After my first visit to the hospital, everything happened quickly. 3 days later, Susan was released into my care. She signed a document drawn up by Astrid that more or less made me her guardian. I can't remember the legal terminology, until she recovered and gave me access to her finances if I needed it, which I didn't. Lastly, I enjoyed caring for Susan during her recovery. This was largely due to the fact that after kindergarten, I massaged and sucked her breasts, licked her pussy to orgasm, and she sucked my dick while I rode her. After about a week, her legs lost support and the bruises had healed enough for us to have sex, as long as we were careful, so we did it as often as possible. Susan did not get out of bed or move at all for 3 weeks after returning home. We got rid of the hospital bed, fired the day nurse, she came back part-time, and we had almost constant physical contact when we were together. One Saturday afternoon, 5 months after Susan had returned to her normal life, well, not as normal as before, when she barely spoke, but after her stay in the hospital, she liked to talk to me. She sat on my lap and said, "Well, Kang Na, we need to talk. It's not a bad conversation when I say I'm a nymphomaniac. It's a good conversation." "You're not a nymphomaniac, are you?" I pretended to be suffocating. "So, why is my dick always sore and I spend so much time on your hole?" "Bad Connor," he said, patting me gently on the shoulder. "Bad boy." "Okay, now listen. My divorce will be finalized next week and I want children with you. What should you do?" "Yes," I said, rubbing my chin. "If we were married, would I be able to fuck you so often?" "More often because I don't have any inhibitions anymore," he laughs. "Oh my God, do you think this is a secret?" I pretended I was drowning again. "I'm not sure I can handle much more." "You'll learn," he laughed. "Well, if you're pregnant, can I fuck you?" "Probably more. I feel like my libido may increase, unlike many other pregnant women," she said, laughing. "In other words, are you ever going to fuck me?" I laughed, not to the grave, but to a lasting feeling of euphoria. "Okay," I said after a long pause. "Let's get married. Can I throw away my birth control pills?" "On our first anniversary," I said with a smile. This is what we do. We are married. Our first child was born on our second birthday. Our second child was born before he was 4 years old. Our third and last was born before we were 6 years old. Susan's fallopian tubes were then tied. I'm not getting any younger, and his constant sexual demands during pregnancy have tired me out, but made me absolutely happy. At one point, 2 dogs appear, and Susan completes the design of an advanced nuclear reactor, winning the $400,000 prize, and the demonstration reactor performs even better than anyone except Susan, predicted. With 3 kids, 2 dogs, a husband who wants to hit her every chance he gets, and a part-time job as a nuclear engineer, Susan is no longer quiet. She's Chatty Katie,